1 year ago, billionaire Vincent Ashworth humiliated me in front of 500 elite guests at his charity gala. He called security when I presented my invitation. Tonight, I'm standing in this same ballroom, but now I own it. And Vincent, he just walked through those doors, expecting to host his event. If you love stories where karma comes full circle, you're going to want to stay until the end. Hit that like button and subscribe. This one's unforgettable. My name is Nadine Carter, and I need to take you back to December 2023. I was 34 years old, running a tech startup that had just secured its first real seed funding. My company built AI-powered educational platform for underserved communities. We weren't huge yet, but we were making noise in the right circles. When that cream-colored envelope arrived at my office with the embossed gold lettering, I actually screamed. The Ashworth Foundation Winter Gala. This wasn't just any event. This was where tech moguls, venture capitalists, and philanthropists gathered. Getting invited meant you'd arrived. I spent 2 weeks preparing. I bought a midnight blue evening gown that cost more than my first car. I rehearsed my elevator pitch until I could deliver it in my sleep. My business partner, David, was invited too. We were both going to represent our company, network with potential investors, and hopefully take our platform to the next level. The venue was the Grand Celestial Ballroom, this impossibly beautiful space with crystal chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls and marble floors that reflected everything like mirrors. I'd seen photos, but I knew being there in person would be different. The night of the gala, I felt like I was walking into a dream. I pulled up to the entrance, handed my keys to the valet, and smoothed down my dress one more time. My hands were shaking with excitement. Through the massive glass doors, I could see the golden glow of the ballroom, hear the gentle music, see the shimmer of expensive jewelry and champagne glasses. I walked up to the entrance, where 2 security guards flanked a woman with a tablet checking names. I handed her my invitation, smiling. She scanned it, looked at me, then scanned it again. Her smile faltered. That's when I felt it. That subtle shift in the air that Black people recognize instantly. She looked at me differently now. She called over one of the security guards, showed him the invitation, and they both looked at me like I was a puzzle they couldn't solve. I kept my smile, but my heart started racing. The guard asked me where I got the invitation. I explained that my company had been invited, that I was one of the founders. He nodded slowly, still holding my invitation, not giving it back. And then Vincent Ashworth himself walked over. Vincent Ashworth was everything you'd expect from a billionaire tech investor who inherited his father's fortune and pretended he'd earned it himself. Tall, silver-haired, expensive suit, that particular brand of confidence that comes from never being told no. He hosted this gala every year to raise money for underprivileged youth programs. The irony of what happened next still burns. He looked at the invitation in the guard's hand, then at me. "Is there a problem?" he asked, and I felt hope for a second that maybe he'd sort this out. But then he said, "How exactly did you obtain this invitation?" Not hello, not welcome. "How did you obtain this?" Like I'd stolen it. I explained again, more carefully this time, that my company, Elevate Education Technologies, had been invited as an emerging tech partner. I even pulled out my phone to show him our email correspondence with his foundation. Vincent barely glanced at it. Instead, he raised his voice just enough that nearby guests turned to look. "We've had issues with fraudulent invitations this year," he announced. "I need to verify this." He didn't need to verify anything. David had walked in 20 minutes earlier with an identical invitation, and nobody had questioned him for a second. But David was white. I was a Black woman in a ballroom full of people who apparently couldn't imagine I belonged there. What happened next still plays in my mind in slow motion. Vincent called over 2 more security guards. He asked them to escort me out while he investigated my invitation. I tried to stay calm, tried to explain one more time, but my voice was shaking now. People were staring. Some were recording on their phones. I saw pity in some faces, smugness in others. and blank indifference in most. Vincent stood there with his arms crossed, playing the protector of his precious event, while I was walked through that enormous ballroom toward the exit. Every step felt like a mile. The click of my heels on that marble floor sounded like a countdown to my humiliation. They put me outside on the sidewalk, just like that. The woman at the door handed me back my invitation with an apologetic smile that meant nothing. And the doors closed. I stood there in my expensive dress, shaking with rage and humiliation, and called an Uber. When I got in the car, I finally let myself cry. I cried angry tears, frustrated tears, heartbroken tears. I'd worked so hard to get to this point, and one man's prejudice had crushed it in minutes. The next morning, I woke up to my phone exploding. Someone had posted a video of me being escorted out. The comments were brutal. Some people supported me, calling out the obvious racial profiling, but Vincent's PR machine was faster. By noon, his foundation had released a statement calling it an unfortunate misunderstanding and claiming they'd reached out to resolve the issue. They never reached out. Not once. No apology. Nothing. And worse, the damage was done. 2 investors who'd been interested in our Series A funding suddenly went quiet. One actually said they wanted to avoid controversy. My humiliation had become my brand, and it was destroying everything I'd built. I spent 3 days in bed, questioning everything. Should I sue? Should I go public with the full story? Should I just give up and go work for someone else's company? But then my best friend Lauren came over. She sat on my bed, looked me in the eye, and said, "The best revenge is success, not just success. Overwhelming, undeniable, impossible to ignore success." Something in her words lit a fire in me that I didn't know existed. I got up, I went back to work, and I worked like my life depended on it. Because, in a way, it did. I poured every ounce of anger, every bit of hurt, every second of that humiliation into building my company. We landed a partnership with 3 school districts in underserved areas. Our platform started showing real results. Kids who'd been struggling were thriving. The data was incredible. And then, 3 months after the gala, everything changed. A major tech company approached us as about acquisition. They wanted to buy Elevate Education Technologies outright. The offer was substantial. $20 million. Old me would have taken it and celebrated, but new me, the me that Vincent Ashworth had accidentally created, negotiated differently. I told them I'd consider a partnership and massive investment for expansion instead of a full buyout. I wanted to maintain control, scale up, and prove that what we were building mattered. After 2 weeks of intense negotiations, they agreed. $45 million in Series B funding. My company's valuation hit $50 million. I was suddenly, unexpectedly, genuinely wealthy. But money wasn't enough. I kept thinking about that ballroom, about that walk of shame, about Vincent's smug face. I started researching him, not obsessively, just strategically. I learned that his annual gala was his pride and joy. He'd been hosting it for 10 years at the same venue, the Grand Celestial Ballroom. It was his tradition, his legacy event. And then I discovered something interesting. The company that owned the ballroom was struggling. They'd overextended during the pandemic, and despite hosting elite events, they were quietly looking for a buyer. I'll never forget the day I walked into that meeting with the venue's ownership group. They had no idea who I was. They certainly didn't remember me from that night. I came in with my lawyer and my accountant, and I made them an offer they couldn't refuse. I paid above asking price. I closed in 30 days, and just like that, the Grand Celestial Ballroom was mine. I owned every chandelier, every marble tile, every inch of the space where I'd been humiliated. For 8 months, I ran it quietly. I kept the existing staff. They'd actually been kind to me that night. It was Vincent and his people who'd caused the scene. I made subtle improvements, built relationships with other event planners, and established myself as a fair, professional owner. And then, in October, Vincent's event coordinator reached out to book the annual gala. The contract had been signed before I purchased the venue, so legally, I had to honor it. But I had options for how I honored it. I decided not to reveal myself beforehand. I wanted Vincent to discover it naturally. I wanted to see his face when he realized. So when the night of the gala arrived, exactly 1 year and 1 week after my humiliation, I was there. I wore a different dress, emerald green this time, and I wore it like armor. I greeted guests as they arrived, introduced myself as the new owner, and watched the ballroom fill with the same crowd that had witnessed my shame. Vincent arrived fashionably late, as men like him always do. He swept in with his entourage, shaking hands, kissing cheeks, owning the room like he owned everything. I watched him for a moment, feeling my heart pound. And then I walked over. I extended my hand professionally and said, "Mr. Ashworth, welcome back to the Grand Celestial. I wanted to personally ensure everything is perfect for your event tonight." He shook my hand automatically, his mind clearly elsewhere, already thinking about his speech or his donors. And then he actually looked at me. I watched his face change. Confusion first, then recognition, then shock. His hand went limp in mine. "What are you doing here?" he stammered, and I heard the disbelief in his voice. I smiled, not a smug smile, just a calm, professional smile. "I own the venue, Mr. Ashworth. I've owned it for 8 months now. Welcome to my ballroom." The words felt like honey on my tongue. My ballroom. The place he'd kicked me out of was now mine. Vincent looked around, like he was searching for hidden cameras, like this couldn't possibly be real. Other guests nearby had started to notice our conversation. Some of them recognized me too. The video from last year had gone viral enough. I could see the whispers starting, the subtle shifts, as people realized what was happening. Vincent tried to compose himself, to put on his billionaire mask again, but I could see his hands shaking slightly. "I see," he said stiffly. "I wasn't aware the ownership had changed." He cleared his throat. "I trust everything is in order for tonight." There was a question behind the question. He was asking if I was going to sabotage his event, if I was going to get my revenge. Here's the thing about revenge. The version I'd imagined for months involved kicking him out, watching him feel what I felt, making him small. But standing there watching him squirm, I realized something. I didn't need to humiliate him. My success was the statement. My ownership of this space was the revenge. Anything else would just make me like him. "Everything is perfect," I told him. "This event supports underprivileged youth programs, and that mission matters more than our history. I would never disrupt something that helps kids." I paused, watching his relief start to show. "However, if you'd like to continue using this venue though for next year's gala, I do have some conditions." Vincent's jaw tightened. "Conditions?" I nodded. "My company, Elevate Education Technologies, will provide free access to our educational platform for every youth program your foundation supports, no cost to you or them. Additionally, I'll need a public acknowledgement of what happened last year and a commitment that your future events will actively welcome and celebrate diverse founders and entrepreneurs, not just tolerate them." I kept my voice level, professional. "Those are my terms for continuing our business relationship." The ballroom had gone quieter around us. People were definitely listening now. Vincent looked at me, and I could see the war happening behind his eyes. Pride versus pragmatism. His image versus his convenience. This venue was his tradition. Finding a new one would be admitting defeat, but agreeing to my terms meant admitting he'd been wrong. "Fine," he said finally, the words seeming to cost him something. "We'll discuss the details." "No," I said gently. "We'll finalize them tonight. Or this is your last event here. I'm happy to wait until after your speech." I wasn't being cruel. I was being clear. I'd learned that from him, actually. An hour later, Vincent gave his annual speech, and to his credit, or maybe because he had no choice, he deviated from his script. He talked about the importance of recognizing bias, about a mistake he'd made the previous year, about learning to see talent and dedication, regardless of who presents it. He didn't name me, but he didn't need to. Everyone in that room knew exactly what he was talking about. And when he mentioned the new partnership with Elevate Education Technologies, people actually applauded. Some of them gave me a standing ovation. I stood in the back of my ballroom, the one I'd been thrown out of, and I let myself feel it. Not triumph exactly, something quieter than that. Peace, maybe, justice. The knowledge that I'd taken the worst moment of my professional life and transformed it into something that would actually help the kids Vincent claimed to care about. After that night, things changed. Vincent and I aren't friends. We never will be, but we're professional. He hosts his gala at my venue every year, and every year I make sure it's flawless, not for him, but for the cause. And every year, hundreds of kids get access to educational tools that might change their lives because I turned humiliation into leverage. Here's what I learned from all of this. When people try to make you small, don't shrink, don't rage, don't let bitterness eat you alive. Instead, grow. Grow so big that they can't ignore you. Grow so powerful that they have to acknowledge you. And when you get that power, use it for something bigger than revenge. Use it to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to someone else. Vincent Ashworth didn't make me successful. I did that, but he did teach me something valuable. He taught me that the world won't always recognize your worth. So you have to build it so undeniably that recognition becomes irrelevant. You have to become so essential that the people who dismissed you end up needing you. I still own the Grand Celestial Ballroom. I've hosted dozens of events there, celebrating Black entrepreneurs, women in tech, and underrepresented founders. Every time I walk through those doors, I remember both who I was that night and who I became because of it. The chandeliers still look like frozen waterfalls. The marble still reflects everything. But now, when I see my reflection in those floors, I see an owner, not a victim. That's my story. That's how the Black woman who was humiliated at a gala came to own the venue a year later. If this moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that they can turn their pain into power. Subscribe for more stories about resilience, karma, and justice. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever turned a humiliating moment into motivation? Remember, they can't stop your shine if you own the chandelier. I'm Nadine Carter, and this is my story.